Should U.S. veterans serving time in federal prison still be receiving full benefits? Thousands are. Plus, a writing candidate who scribbled his way right into the mayor's office, and an upset victory in Wichita after a brutal mayoral campaign. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. This last Tuesday was Election Day. Now, it may have been for local elections, but there's still a lot to unpack today. We start with a contentious Wichita mayoral race that ended with a challenger in the winner's circle. KSN's Craig Andrus takes a look at what's next for now Mayor-elect Brandon Whipple.
During the election, the water treatment plant was a controversial topic. Today, Wichita Mayor-elect Brandon Whipple says he may look at the current plans to see if the city will need to make any changes.
You know, we might have to. It's really got to take an action of the council to revisit or make any changes.
Whipple says we have a very experienced council, so that will help him get up to speed quickly on water treatment and other issues. Political experts say Whipple will be one voice on that council, so he'll have to find a way how to work with them to get things done, whether it's public safety, water, or the bus system.
And find the time and the moments where he can begin to introduce the things that he wants to bring to the council as that new voice.
Whipple says he's already reached out to council members to talk about what he wants to get done, and he plans on having a conversation with the police chief as well.
We have less police officers than some of our sister cities. And, you know, it's not just so much about having more police officers, but having enough police officers so we can start building relationships in communities and get back to community policing.
Other issues for Whipple include city bus service and the possibility of changing routes. And he would like to look at buying more buses that could be more environmentally friendly.
And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Nick Hoheisel, Republican from Wichita, and Dr. Michael Smith, political scientist from Emporia State University, and State Representative John Carmichael, Democrat from Wichita. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sure.
So I'm going to start off with this race, and I'm going to start with you, Michael. Was this a Whipple win, a Longwell loss, or pure craziness?
Well, some of my colleagues in political science at other universities have made some terrific precinct maps, and it's pretty clear what happened, that Whipple really crushed it in the central city of Wichita, and then the incumbent did better more in the outlying parts. And candidates who draw from that population, the problem you run into is low voter turnout. Communities like Central City, Wichita, or another example would be Wyandotte County up in the Kansas City area, they can make a huge difference, but they have to vote. And when you get into areas that are a little bit more mixed in terms of demographics, incomes, and so on and so forth, a lot of strengths in those communities, but unfortunately voter turnout's not one of them. So maybe, and this is really, really early speculation, but maybe we're seeing a renewed interest in turning out and voting among folks whose voter turnout is a little wobbly. And if that can happen in Wichita, who knows where else it can happen.
So we were talking before the show a little bit about how crazy this race was. And John, I know you've been around politics for quite some time. Do you have anything that compares to what we've seen?
No. All three of the candidates in this election are friends of mine of one kind or another. But what is clearly unfortunate is this should not be the price to be involved in politics, to have secret corporate or LLCs from out of state running unverified slander against a candidate. Now I know some people say, well, but Mayor Longwell was criticized by the Eagle and the press, etc. But that may be a more legitimate criticism. If you take gifts and you don't report those, that's something the public would probably want to know about. Now, whether that would or would not have caused me or kept me from voting for Mayor Longwell, maybe that's a different discussion too. But that's what I see as the problem. And I also honestly don't appreciate the participation of the county and state political parties in what's supposed to be a nonpartisan election. And I hope voters will be aware of that and not encourage that in the future.
Nick?
Yeah, so I agree. It was a crazy race from the onset. I congratulate Mayor Whipple on his victory, or Mayor-elect Whipple, I should say, on his victory. Right now, I think his number one issue that he needs to do is bring us together as a city. We are divided right now. You've seen that in the mayor's race. 54% of Wichitans wanted somebody other than Mayor-elect Whipple to be mayor. He only got 46% of the vote. I think that's key. We're divided as a city. He needs to step up, bring us all together, and move us all forward in one direction.
Well, and I'm going to talk about that division a little bit. A lot of that and the craziness that we're talking about goes back to an attack ad against Whipple during the campaign. And there have been a lot of accusations hurled about that ad. The debate over that attack ad against Whipple got hotter this last week. The Wichita Eagle connected Representative Michael Capps to the ad. He denied having anything to do with it, pointing an accusing finger at the Sedgwick County Republican Party chair. We go back to KSN's Craig Andrus for an explanation.
I had absolutely nothing to do with the production of this video, the fundraising of this video, the promotion of this video. I've never touched this video.
Representative Michael Capps maintaining he has never been involved with an attack ad against Brandon Whipple. He now says Dalton Glasscock, the Sedgwick County Republican Party chair, approved of the ad in a meeting where both were in attendance. He says both men viewed the video at the same time. Glasscock says no way.
I think it's a ploy to take attention away from himself and his alleged actions.
Glasscock says he never approved of a video and says Representative Capps needs to provide proof if he thinks that is true. He still says Capps need to step down and he is no longer welcome in the county Republican Party functions.
And that still stands, regardless of whether he decides to step down or remain in office. He's not welcome in any of our SCRP functions.
Capps says he still stands by that statement.
Once this video was produced, it was brought to my attention by Chairman Glasscock whether or not I approved or what my concerns were, and I expressed concerns then. This video was overly aggressive.
Now, there has been a lot of talk about the source of this video, and it is, you guys both mentioned, it's kind of this hidden source out of New Mexico. We don't know exactly who's behind it. This is not the first time that Michael Capps has kind of butted heads with the state Republican Party. That seems unusual, really.
Well, local politics are kind of a heady mix. You know, you had one of the issues in this race, it was mentioned in the earlier video, was no bid contracts. You've got a lot of money, you've got these elections that traditionally have really low turnout. I don't know the details of this story. I'm not sure anybody does, or if they do, they're not saying. So I won't go off into those weeds, but maybe this election is a good thing in the sense that this kind of politics is often what you get when you have uncompetitive elections. When folks get kind of entrenched or when there's a heavy party leaning, then instead of real sort of issue-based fights, you get this sort of petty sort of stuff that's personal and kind of soap opera-ish, and that's not politics at its best. Maybe really robust competition, including involving the political parties, would be better than this.
Okay, interesting, because you're going the opposite direction for where John was going. He wants to see less partisanship in the local elections.
Sure. In fact, number one, I don't know who to believe, Dalton Glasscock or Michael Capps. People make their own decisions. But what in the world is the Sedgwick County chair doing approving ads in a nonpartisan election for city council? What in the world is a state representative doing approving ads in a nonpartisan election? And by the way, the Democrats sent out mail too, and I've told some of those folks my opinion about it. The parties need to stay out of these local elections because just like we said, Sam Brownback brought Washington to Topeka. What we're seeing now is some of Topeka being brought here to Wichita, and I don't think that's good for folks. Now, if we want to establish partisan elections like we have for county commission, then that's what we ought to do. I probably won't support that, but until then, the parties ought to stay out of this, in my opinion.
Thoughts, Nick?
I'm all for making them partisan. I mean, they're already partisan. We're already seeing it. We've seen it this election. I don't think there should be anything that precludes Chairman Glasscock from being involved as in his role as chairman or as in his role as an individual. Going back to the video, let me say that this video is disgusting. It is not how politics should be. We're losing way too many young, brilliant minds in politics that should be involved in politics because they're fearful of videos and attack ads like this. I've talked with Chairman Glasscock. He has assured me he is not involved in this video whatsoever. So I know there's an ongoing lawsuit. I'm interested to see what names come out. We'll let Mayor-elect Whipple handle that, and we'll kind of go from there.
And I'm going to end our discussion of this race on that lawsuit issue. Thank you for bringing it up. Michael, I know that with politicians, the level of proof necessary to win a defamation or slander lawsuit is quite a bit higher than it is for the standard Kansan on the street.
It's extraordinarily high. Most of what I know about this was in that video. But based on what I'm learning, I can't, I'm not a lawyer, but it doesn't look very promising. You're absolutely right. Public figures and public officials are in a different category, and if you want to prove some type of defamation, you get into having to prove intent and so on and so forth. It's, to me, this is more of an example of sort of a soap opera type thing.
I don't think it's a soap opera, and just to disagree a little bit.
Go for it.
Politicians and other public figures, even the press, there has to be showing of actual malice that you intentionally defamed someone or slandered them.
That's it.
But when you make unfounded allegations that a politician who's married with a family is somehow engaged in some sort of improper relationship with women, that's slander per se, and it doesn't matter whether you're the president or whether you're my dog sitter. Doesn't matter. Law doesn't allow you to make those kinds of lies about people. And I hope we'll see this work through the process.
I think too, and Representative Carmichael's an attorney, so he could correct me if I'm wrong. One of the benefits of this lawsuit is discovery.
Absolutely.
They will be able to dig in, look at the evidence, and I think that might be just what Mayor-elect Whipple
Now,
is.
the other side of it is Mayor-elect Whipple may decide not to pursue this. He may decide
Yes.
that this is a distraction from official duty and move on. He's certainly entitled to do that as well.
Absolutely.
But if that lawsuit goes forward, we'll probably know who was telling the truth.
It should also be noted that whoever did this failed catastrophically.
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
hearing
Yes.
anything about this harming
The
Whipple. It
outcome
sounds
may
like
have
it
been
benefited
different in this
Yeah.
election,
Yeah.
but for a sympathy vote for Brandon Whipple.
I agree with that.
Now, based on my phone calls from viewers, I think that very well may have played a role in the results.
Yep.
All right. Well, we also had a third major candidate in the Wichita mayoral race, a write-in. He did not do as well as he had hoped, but there's another write-in candidate out in Great Bend who did quite a bit better. He actually won by scribbling his way right into City Hall. Cake's Bree Smith explains.
An overwhelming amount of people here in Great Bend voted their next mayor by writing in his name on the ballot. Cody Schmidt will be taking over in 2020 and is focused on growing the community.
I want to work together with the people that are currently in place for our future today so we can plan for tomorrow. One of my slogans this year and this campaign was, I'm a man that gets up every morning and goes to work just like you.
Schmidt won his campaign by a landslide against 3 other opponents who were named on the ballot. After some hesitation, the father of 2 started his write-in campaign. He looks at his kids as motivation.
I'm willing to give up my time and sacrifices to make this community better.
Great Bend election workers told Cake News even though write-ins are more common in smaller communities, the city hasn't seen it happen in decades. About 16,000 people live in the city of Great Bend, but the city administrator says only about 2,000 people voted in the election.
If we're not willing to put our names on the ballot, at least we can put support behind candidates who share our same vision and our same values for our community.
Francis is disappointed in the voting turnout, but he's hopeful Schmidt will step in and be just what the people need.
I'm excited to work with him, and he's going to have some new ideas, and and I really just want someone that has a good vision for Great Bend, strong leadership.
Schmidt knew the road to becoming the mayor as a writer Candidate was going to be challenging, but he's thankful to be a part of a city wanting change.
But I can't tell the community, thank you enough. I think the big thing is just coming back together, being small town USA, and working together to grow this community.
His term will last 2 years starting in January. In Great Bend, Bree Smith, Cake News, on your side.
Now, this was not one of those some 60 races across Kansas that didn't have anybody running, and so a write-in was going to win. This was a race that had people on the ballot, and he didn't eke out a win. He won big. How unusual is that?
It's unusual, but not unheard of. Kansas law is a little bit more supportive of write-in candidates. The issue is how exact does it have to be? The spelling of a name, for example, can be very sensitive. I mean, there are states where if the person filed and used their middle initial and you don't include the middle initial, it doesn't count. Most dramatic write-in candidate was a few years ago when an incumbent, actually, a senator from Alaska named Lisa Murkowski, won re-election as a write-in candidate, and her last name is Murkowski. It's not the easiest name in the world to spell, and she pulled it off. And actually, the person that she defeated was a native Kansan, of all things. But Kansas law allows intent. So if this gentleman was a Schmidt with a D in his name. If you maybe left the D off or had 2 T's, they're going to count that. In some other states, they wouldn't have. So Kansas law is a little bit more supportive. So sure, it's unusual, but it's not impossible.
Kansas is a voter intent state. If the intent of the voter can be discerned, then the vote is counted, even if you misspell the names. If you say Lindy Wells instead of Lyndon Wells.
Right.
And our election commissioner said that would be the case. What is surprising to me, though, is when you have someone with the business acumen and the reputation of the community of Lindy Wells, you have the support of the past Democratic mayor, you have the support of the former Republican mayor, and you only poll about 18%. I don't know what in the world happened, because I would have expected a much better showing by Lindy Wells, and I don't know why that happened.
My perspective on that from watching the race was timing. He didn't get back into the race until, 3 or 4 days before early voting started.
I can also tell you there were people the day after the primary election who were encouraging him to get back in the race.
Yes. Yeah.
I think with this story here, this is what politics is about. We just went from what politics shouldn't be about to what politics should be about now. This gentleman wanted to make a difference. He stepped up. He decided to put his name on the ballot, so to say. I'm thankful for that, and I wish him the best of luck. I think it's an awesome story.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we might point out, in a small community or smaller community like Great Bend, you can figure out pretty close who those 2,000 people are who vote in municipal elections, and you can effectively run a write-in campaign, but that's harder to do in a community like ours.
All right. Well, there are several other issues that were on the ballot. Many of them were bond issues for school districts across the state. And it wasn't as good a night for the Russell County School Board as voters there turned down a bond issue. The board says it needs to keep the school's temperatures regulated. USD 407 in Russell County was one of many school districts trying to pass a bond issue this last week. It did not pass there. It would have paid to replace an HVAC system, among other things. Last year, the district was forced to cancel class because temperatures in one school dropped into the 50s. The superintendent says they will try to get the repairs done using grants and donations instead. It was the second time this year the measure failed. Okay, so we're in Kansas. 50s doesn't sound that cold, but I guess in the fall when it first drops to the 50s, it's an issue. But it speaks to stories that I have done from several different school districts who are running into these problems and they can't get the money raised from the local tax base. Is there a point at which the state jumps in and says, you know what, okay, maybe we need to do something? I hear the state has more money at this point, or is expecting more money at this point than
Representative
it was a
Hoheisel
week
is
ago.
expecting a raise, he told me.
Yeah. I believe the governor will do away with that funding rather quick. I don't know the particulars
Through
of
business
this.
tax cuts.
Oh, well, that's another story for another day. The particulars on this story, I don't know how it was marketed in Russell. this sounds like an issue. I don't want my kids going to school and learning in 50-degree temperatures. I wouldn't want that. It's unfortunate that they are not maximizing their local option budget. So I don't know where the state can step in. We finally solved the school funding lawsuit. We pumped $90 million more in. I don't know how much is left that we could pump in right now.
Well, and we've certainly had the conversation here before, John, that there are a lot of other things in the state calling for money.
Sure, but if we talk about this, it takes us back to a problem in our school funding program, which has been here since the mid-90s or even before, and that is that in broad brush, capital improvements are funded by the local school district, whereas operating expenses and day-to-day are the state. So the law says it's got to be equitable, it's got to be adequate, but not necessarily for the school building that you go to school in. I went to Wichita Heights, it's a pretty nice building, but when I was in high school, we went up to Shawnee Mission. It was like, my lands, how do they have all of these things? Well, it's tax base. So if we want to deal with these problems, we want to deal with flight from western Kansas, we may have to think about taking money from Sedgwick, Johnson, Shawnee, Douglas County and using it to build schools in smaller communities, or we have to consolidate school districts.
Oh,
you said the C word.
Neither, and that's what I'm saying, neither one of those are good options.
I don't think a run for governor is in your
I have no desire to be in the Senate, let alone the governor's office. But that's the practical problem that we face.
Yeah. Well, there's another practical problem, not that the state faces, but that the Veterans Administration faces, and it involves some folks here in Kansas. Right now, there are about 181,000 veterans serving time in federal prisons, and some are still receiving full benefits in violation of VA policy. One of them, according to a complaint filed with the Department of Veterans Affairs, was a man convicted of plotting to blow up a Somali apartment complex in Garden City. KAKE's Greg Miller takes a look.
Lula Harris cannot believe how her life has changed over the last 3 years.
We had a relationship, met him in March of 2006.
But that relationship with her then common-law husband, Curtis Allen, took a drastic turn in 2016.
Were arrested for plotting a domestic terrorist attack on a housing complex in Garden City.
She walked into the G&G mobile home dealership in Liberal, where Curtis worked, and what she saw inside made her panic.
Explosives being cooked on the island. I questioned him, and he just acted like it was no big deal.
Allen, Gavin Wright, and Patrick Stein were plotting to blow up an apartment complex where Somali immigrants lived in Garden City. She called police, and eventually the three were convicted. All of them were sentenced to 25 years in prison.
We don't allow people to target those who may be unpopular, disfavored by them.
But 3 years after she first walked into that trailer, Harris learned something else that made her panic again. That's because Curtis Allen also served in the military, both in the Marines and the Army National Guard. And she says she can prove that he is still receiving full veteran benefits.
I had access to his bank account information.
Here your most recent check amount for a disability.
By her calculation, he's received more than $21,000 even after he was convicted.
He's incarcerated.
Even in prison, he could still be paid benefits, but by VA policy, the payment should be about $100 a month. Instead, he's getting more than 10 times that.
$1,368.69.
Harris filed this complaint with the VA, telling the agency he was in a Colorado prison, but they won't talk to her.
I tried to talk to the most higher ups that I could get to in the VA, and that was almost impossible.
The VA repeatedly refused our request for an on-camera interview. Anytime we asked for specifics about Curtis Allen's case, it referred us back to department policy. In a statement, a spokesperson told us it is the veteran's responsibility to notify the VA of his or her incarceration and date of release. However, because veterans do not always notify VA of their incarceration, VA has established data matching agreements with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and the Social Security Administration to help identify incarcerated VA beneficiaries. But a 2016 study says that data matching program doesn't always work. A report shows that in 10 years, the Veterans Benefits Association didn't adjust payments to 53% of veterans incarcerated in federal facilities. The cost? $59.9 million in overpayments. On the state and local level, it was worse, $162 million, all taxpayer money.
And you wonder where that money goes. I mean, where does it go? An inmate in a federal or state prison is not allowed to have that much money in their account. It's shameful.
State Representative John Wheeler works on the Veterans and Military Committee. He's also from Garden City, so the story hits close to home.
It's still in the minds of the community that somebody had come to develop such a dark soul and hatred and contempt for an entire community that is willing to blow it up.
A veteran himself, he was outraged when we told him that a convicted terrorist was still getting full benefits.
I do respect the fact that this gentleman earned his pension, but he lost it when he undertook to murder and slaughter hundreds of people.
VA policy says that any veteran caught receiving full benefits would have to forfeit, but Wheeler isn't convinced the Veterans Administration is following its own rules on that either.
I think that Congress and the VA and whatever we can do on a state level have to address this issue so this stops.
He promises to bring the matter up when lawmakers return to the State House in January. By Harris's calculations, Allen will get another $3,000 before that happens. She was already a whistleblower once about that bomb plot. She's talking again now, hoping this money meant to help our heroes goes to veterans programs and homes, not to prisoners.
Who can we get to stand accountable for it?
Now, this is, of course, a federal issue, but certainly Representative Wheeler is wanting to look at what the state can do. Is there anything?
First, let me give a disclaimer. One of the lawyers in my office was appointed by the federal court to represent one of these three defendants, so I don't want to address this specifically. I do understand my friend John Wheeler's revulsion at what we see here. But we also need to keep in mind, number one, we need Congressman Estes sitting here to answer this question. Realistically, and with all respect to John, I don't think the state legislature is going to be able to change this. But there was another kicker, and that was there were veterans who were in the Larned State Hospital as well as the sexually violent predator treatment program who are disqualified from benefits, and as a result the state had to pay for their care. Right. And so it came home to roost on us the fact that they had lost benefits.
All right. Well, we're going to have to end it there. We are out of time. Nick, Michael, John, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. Have a great week.